Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Dr. Ball. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good.
Doing well, and I hope the economy gets better.
Yeah.
It has a ways to go. I think the grave danger and exaggeration of the problems we have may back off a little bit because a few people are waking up and saying, enough is enough. Why do we have to go through all this rigmarole by a couple power freaks? And that's what we have to deal with, the power freaks. So, but I want to start off with something, a friend of ours, a friend of mine, he worked for me for a while, and he works for AIER right now, American Institute for Research.
Yeah.
And he's always been interested in gold. He's also interested in cryptocurrency. But he wrote an article that we looked at, and I think it's fascinating. It caught my attention was what the title said, because it talked about 1957, and 1957 is a year that I remember very well. But I don't remember this story that Jeff emphasized. What he wanted to talk about was the epidemic, a flu epidemic, and there were 116,000 Americans died from it. And you'd think I would remember that because I remember 57 was a very important year for me and my wife too, because I finished college. We got married in 1957. I started medical school, and it was a year that was, sort of quite bland. The silent generation, no wars going on, and I thought, well, we probably didn't have a pandemic or anything. But we did. 116,000 people died. And the point was made about this whole thing, why it was so different. Can you believe it? That the doctors took care of it. The medical professions handled the problem of a medical problem, and took care of this. And yet the politicians stayed out of it. Quite a bit different than what we're putting up with today. So we have a mess today because there's overreaction, and pandemics and viral illnesses have been around for a long time. The argument is the deaths in the United States today from the coronavirus is 70,000 or so. They're totally unreliable. The total number of deaths in a country is very important, but finding out exactly what the causes are. No testing or fudging testing, imaginary testing, or combination of testing, and then a motivation to fudge on the death certificate. There's so many reasons why, the actual effect of just dying from coronavirus is probably much, much lower, although significant, and probably played a role in it. I don't think anybody argues with the fact that the elderly, whose immune system are down, partially because of the way we treat the elderly too, and the way they treated the elderly in New York, by insisting they go back. But no, there's a lot of improvement there, but it's really amazing of the attitude. And I just want to read his introduction, because I found that fascinating. It describes 1957 pretty well. And it wasn't, just compare it to what we have to listen to today, and listen to the television, and listen to all the people who are protecting us. He said, the year was 1957. Elvis's new movie, Jailhouse Rock, was packing the theaters. The last episode of I Love Lucy aired on television. The show West Side Story held tryouts in Washington, D.C. and opened on Broadway in September. Ford's new car, an Edsel, I know about an Edsel, rolled off the assembly line. The Cold War with Russia was on, and In God We Trust appeared on our U.S. currency for the first time. Sounds like it was pretty bland. In the midst of a severe epidemic and people being very sick, and just think of taking a scenario like that, the political climate there, and turning a pandemic into practically a non-event. Because I do not remember, I remember 57 well, but I don't remember any discussions or concerns or worries about that. And yet now when we put it up with what we have now, everybody's going to remember 2019 and 2020 and the flu epidemic, which changed everything. And we'll never get back to normal. And we need the politicians to take care of it. And not only that, in the midst of something that we can explain and could have done something about it, and that is the financial crisis that is thrown in there, which is a pure result of bad policy, more spending, and all the things we've talked about. It is there. So quite a bit of difference. People say, "Oh, you're living in the dark age." Well, some of the 1957, if you think about it, was not too bad. So I wished we could sort of change the attitude. We don't need to go back to 57, but we might be able to suggest to people that we don't have to have hysteria with this. We don't have to listen to the people. Sometimes the people who warn us aren't always that credible. They can lose their credibility because a lot of their predictions are wrong. So I would like to encourage everybody to think that reaction is appropriate. Medical care is appropriate, but it has to be within reason. And I would say that right now it is unreasonable what our government's doing to us. And we'll talk some more about some of the incidences that have occurred. And one thing for sure is a lot of abuse of personal liberty. And that's the big issue.
And, Jeff Tucker's piece, which inspired this first part of our show, the title was great. Elvis was king, Ike was president, and 116,000 Americans died in a pandemic. And I think it's great to have your personal reflection, because the fact that it's not a really strong thing in your memory is important, because you weren't just a person walking around at the time. You were getting ready to go to medical school. So you were attuned to medical issues. You were thinking about medical issues, yet still it wasn't something strong in your mind.
Right.
It's amazing. But
a bit different.
Yeah, a bit different
from today.
But Jeff has a couple of interesting things in his article, and there are so many similarities, Dr. Paul, to what we have. It was influenza A H2N2 virus. It emerged in East Asia. It started in Singapore, then Hong Kong, came to the U.S. later in 57. 1.1 million deaths worldwide, 116,000 Americans. Like today, it hit the elderly and diseased people disproportionately. One particularly troubling thing about it, as Jeff pointed out, is that it was very dangerous for pregnant women, which thankfully we're not having now. It had a higher infection rate than the Spanish flu, but only a 0.67% mortality, and we're looking at a lower one for this one so far. But he goes on to point out nothing was shut down forcibly by government. There were a few organizations voluntarily suspended their big gatherings, big public gatherings, large events. But other than that, as you point out, it was treated as a medical issue and not a political issue. So the question we might have, what is the difference? How is it so different now? If we look at our first clip, this is something Jeff put in his article. This is the New York Times in 1957. We don't have to read it all, but just the first, this is Wednesday, September 18th, 1957. Let's all keep a cool head about the Asian influenza, right? Let's contrast that with New York Times today. Look at the next clip. Restarting America means people will die. So when do we do it? Look at the absolute difference in the coverage. I think that's something to talk about.
And the New York Times is reflecting a culture. We could say it's New York Times, the whole thing, but they represent a bigger philosophy. The authoritarians that believe they should have this authority, and the end of a wonderful period in our history, at least wonderful parts of it. I think that things are going to change. They were bad. And people say we're not going back to where we were. Well, some of that could be good, but I think we're in the midst of some major changes. The country's bankrupt, and it's being witnesses in the financial markets. And this, too, is such a strong demonstration of our attitudes. And it's a philosophic fight right now, because some people say, I want my freedom, I want in there, and I'm willing to go to jail to prove my point. I got to feed my kids, and they stand up for this. But the other people say, you better obey the law. The judge told you to do this. So I think the demonstration in this 1957 is a pretty neat comparison, and we could learn from it. But I think we're going to argue about it for a while. But I think we have the moral high ground, and I think we have the constitutional high ground, because I am just so disgusted with the acceptance of not only the president making too many executive orders, but every governor and every mayor and every county judge. I mean, there's a lot of good ones out there, and the bad ones make the news. But it marches on. They keep giving and putting people in prison. And the thing is not that they did harm, but you didn't do what we told you. Yeah. And you haven't apologized. This attitude. So I think this is a demonstration, but also an opportunity to assess ourselves where we were in 1957 versus what we're doing now. And, the most important advice there that you mentioned is that the difference between what the medical profession should do. In 57, the medical profession was supposed to deal with it, not the politicians. And just think of how long we've been arguing about the politicians warning us. The New York Times is a political hit piece. So there they said, people are going to die, and try to panic people.
And thinking about what's different then the media obviously is the biggest thing, I think. But I think what we've seen from then to now is much more state control of the media and of medicine and the narrative. The media in the U.S. is so closely in tune with what the government says. They don't have a critical eye. And I think the population of the U.S. is so propagandized that they've lost their critical thinking skills. People are afraid to go outside because the media tells them. I don't watch mainstream media very much. I was talking to my dad the other night, and he said, yeah, I watch the news. It's just nonstop bodies, bodies, bodies. That's all they say the whole time. So it's really, people have lost their ability to think, really. And I went into a local business here yesterday, and small business, and the proprietor, she was complaining because her business it was down by the beach. Her business was picking up so much. So people are coming in here all the time, and I don't like it, I said, well, this is great, people are getting out in the sun. Yes, but it's not safe. It's not safe. So so it just shows how propagandized the masses are, and I think that's a big difference.
I think, though, the news that people are hearing now that are changing attitudes is the ruthlessness, the way our legal authorities treat civilians who are trying to make a living, feed their kids, keep their employees. And the other thing that they do, and we want to talk about what happened up in Dallas, but the big thing is yes, it's a personal thing. Yeah, I want to be able to earn a living and feed my kids. But I have employees too. We have to take care of them. It's a freedom issue as well. But they accept that. But you can't break the rule of law. So the rule of law is placed up here, but whose law?
Yeah.
These arbitrary executive orders. And the other day I made the point where one sheriff wanted to know that his constituents, he would never take their guns away from them. And there he was enforcing you can't assemble and get together and not even do anything violent, just assemble in front of a place. And he says, oh, no, we can't let that happen. So the First Amendment doesn't mean anything. Yeah. The second that he knows, he pays homage to that. But this is, I think, the various things that are happening now. But this incident in the Dallas arrest and punishment of this lady that opened up her salon.
Yeah, it is. It's disturbing. Shelley Luther is her name. She owns a hair salon in Dallas. She decided to open her salon. She's a single mother. She said she hadn't had a paycheck since March. Her kids are hungry. The gals that work for her, their kids are going hungry, so she opened it. They said, don't open it. She said she's going to open it anyway, and so she went to court. They took her to court. She was arrested. So yesterday she was sentenced to 7 days in prison with a $7,000 fine for disobeying the order to close. Listen to what the judge said. Talk about power freak. Judge Eric Moyer lashed out at Luther. This is from a Washington Examiner. Hold off on that for a second, please. Washington Examiner column. He said he accused her of placing her ideas of liberty and freedom above the welfare of the Texan people. Here's what he said to her when he sentenced her to go to jail for opening her business. That you see the error of your ways and understand that society cannot function when one's own belief in a concept of liberty permits you to flaunt your disdain for the rulings of duly elected officials. You owe an apology to the elected officials for whom you disrespected, for flagrantly ignoring and in one case defiling their orders, which you know obviously applies to you. He actually offered her a deal. I will keep you out of jail if you apologize for being selfish for opening your own business. She said, no, I'm not going to apologize for trying to feed my kids. So she's in jail.
But this demonstrates so clearly a point that I like to make frequently, and that is, what's the role of government? And is the government there to make us safe? And he assumes that's his job. He's a policeman and a law official, and so therefore he has a lot of authority. And they can't. There's the fact that he thinks he's doing, or claims he's doing good with the policies he's taking. But he also claims that the process is good, but the process is lousy.
Yeah.
It means it's turned its own head. If government's there to protect our liberties and we solve our problems in a totally different way, but he says, but first you have to give us the authority to make you safe, and that means we have to treat you like, I often would use the analogy, treat you like cattle in a field.
Yeah.
Cattle in a field are very well kept, and they're safe until you know what happens.
Yeah.
You know. So, but that I think is an important thing, and that's their attitude. That has to be reversed if anybody thinks we can move closer to returning toward a freer society and actually improve on a freer society and be more precise, because there were a lot of shortcomings in the way the Constitution's been treated and some of the flaws that existed. And so this could lead to an assessment, but we have to get the people to ask, what is the role of government? Is it there to take care of us, have financial security and physical security, and make us safe and secure? And they use that argument in foreign policy and everything, that you have to have this responsibility to take care of the world, and that is our job. And they do it in moral terms. You know how they do it in foreign policy. That you mean you wouldn't go in there to save these people?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll send them food so we can help the bad guys keep it from the people you want to feed. All the nonsense about how you get involved. The best thing to do is have very limited government designed for a precise purpose.
Exactly. And let's put up a picture of the judge. And, obviously we don't take a political position here, but it is interesting to note that he is up for re-election in November. So I wonder how the people of Dallas might feel about re-electing someone like this, who puts a single mother in jail for trying to feed her children. The other thing about this, Dr. Paul, this whole Dallas thing is so disturbing, is how arbitrary it is. They say, oh, we're making our decisions based on science. Well, the Governor Abbott had a press conference yesterday, and just out of the blue, willy-nilly, he said, you know what, reopening hair salons, it used to be May 18th. I'm going to change it and make it May 8th. So based on what? So this woman's going to jail because the science says this, but he just changes it according to his whim.
And they were claiming that they would be open on Friday.
Yeah.
So you mean that we're going to put somebody in prison over this 2-day thing? Why can't they just ignore it a little bit?
Yeah.
Everybody that has ever had a civil infraction of some minor traffic law, they don't end up going to jail or getting fined. Sometimes a policeman will even give you a warning. That was back in 1957. I forgot. That's what they would do back then. Give you a little warning and just be a little more cautious. But unfortunately, we have a lot of people in government that feel that that's their responsibility, and they must get a sense of superiority about it. The fact that they can issue these orders and practically tell the owner of the salon to bow down to them. You have to obey. You have to apologize to us because we are the law. And I just hope that it's being ironed out, because I think if you had a vote on this, I think the American people would say, oh, come on now, let's go. Let the poor woman work for a couple more days. It's her salon. She can take care of herself, and if people don't want to go, they would argue that. But the other thing is they don't even want people to have that priority of making their own decision, because both sides would have to make the decision. The person that goes in and the person that runs it, because the person who works there has to be concerned too. And that's the way a free society would work. It would be so old-fashioned, though. You mean all these communications and get-togethers would be done voluntarily? Well, how would that work? Doesn't the government have to tell you who can go where at all times and what the regulations are? Well, yes, that's what we've been living with, and people are conditioned. But let's hope the people wake up and say, we don't like this. They don't know the details, and they might not be able to describe it, but they do describe it, and they say, I want my freedom back.
Yeah.
They know what basic freedom is like when they're locked in. They are prisoners when they can't get out of their house. And some people are overly locked in, because they don't have somebody to drive them in the car. And where are you going to go in a car? For so long you couldn't even go to the store. And even now, it's difficult. If an elderly person's going in there, they might have trouble getting around a store if they didn't have some help, because it's not like it was. Get used to it. It's not. It's never be like it was before. But I would like to think that. We don't want it the way it was before. We want it much better than the way it was before. And people should be told that there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing selfish about that. Self-interest and self-reliance are good things, not bad things.
And I noticed something. The politicians that don't let you get a haircut, Abbott looked pretty good yesterday. His hair was cut. It was combed real nice. He had some makeup on. I doubt he cut his own hair. And remember, the mayor of Chicago, she was caught. She told everyone else, don't get your hair cut, don't go to a salon. She was caught having a hairdresser come in and dress her. She said, well, I'm the face of the city, so I have to look good, So it's do as I say, not as I do, which actually brings us to our final segment of talking about Neil Ferguson. If you remember, Neil Ferguson is the guy from Imperial College in Cambridge in the UK that came out with the paper at first that said 2.2 million Americans will die and 500,000 citizens of the UK will die from this coronavirus. And he has a history of massively inflating these numbers in previous pandemics and things. But he came out with this. When he came out with that paper, which, as we've talked about with the professor earlier, was not peer-reviewed, that means nobody could look at his models and say, hey, your models are wrong. It wasn't peer-reviewed. He came out with that, and Boris Johnson in the UK did a U-turn and said, okay, we got to do full lockdown. This is crazy. And that's when Fauci got to Trump and said, hey, look at these numbers from Ferguson. We're all going to die. And so that's when Trump, changed it to well, turns out, Ferguson was saying you've got to lock everyone down tight. Can't even get out of your house. Don't move. He was out gallivanting with a married woman, having a liaison, even though he had reported he had some COVID symptoms. So this is a classic example of a power freak going out, do as I say, not as I do.
Does that mean that his personal morality and his personal moral principles sort of look a lot like his public morality? And they go together. But it's interesting. He writes this article. He doesn't follow any of the academic rules. He writes it probably as a politician.
Yeah.
It wouldn't go anywhere if we had, I complain about the universities promoting bad ideas, and they're locked in on a lot of this stuff too. Where do our politicians learn their economics? At the universities and their foreign policy and everything else. So they had him do that, and if he writes it, it's wonder, does he do this and just offer it up, or does somebody say, hey, this is what we need you to do. We need you to have an article, and we'll take care of it, and then they accept it. I can't believe that he just out of clear blue writes an article and is misled because he's been academically,
compromised.
Yeah, to say the least, that he goes and writes it. But then again, if that's the case, where are the people grabbing this stuff? Why don't they ask it? Like that was your complaint about the journalists. They're supposed to ask these questions, but they're starting to. What we have to search, and that we have found some, that identifies with a libertarian, independent thinking on these issues. So I just hope that more people ask those questions, and so. If I'm always looking for something good to come out of this mess, and maybe the good thing is they went too far and too fast, and they are so cocky that when they say the way they treat a woman that is trying to feed her kids, and that's too much. Well, what did she do? Was she beating them or something? No, she just wants to feed them, and she wanted her employees to have a check. They had kids too. Oh, that's evil. You got to follow us because we know best. We're going to make you safe so you never get coronavirus, but we're going to get the other kind of viruses, which is a demented mind. Yeah. And that virus is going around and it's prevalent up in the Washington area. So I'm glad you're out of Washington area lately.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, I'll close with a power freak Lena Hidalgo update. If we have our last clip, we can put it up. A couple of days ago, we talked about how she tweeted, hey, you need to report on any businesses that are doing things against the governor if they have too many people enjoying a meal or something. So unfortunately, 450 businesses were reported for violating the closure order, and that overwhelmed the page. And also a lot of people sent a lot of obscene messages to Lena Hidalgo as well. But you know, there was a piece on one of the local clicktohouston.com, one of the local networks, that makes a good point. They brought in their legal analyst, Brian Weiss, and he said this is dangerous because this could be a tool for people who try to damage his business reputation. He says from a legal perspective, there's no way any purported violation, particularly one that's not reported contemporaneously with contemporaneous proof, is ever going to make it past the, quote, why are we doing this stage. So that's a good point. So Hidalgo, your days are numbered.
Good. And I want to close with bringing up a thing we touched on, and that is the judge and the way he treated the lady up in Dallas. He was lecturing her and said that you have to obey. It was all this. You have to do what I tell you to do. And on the tail end of that lecture, he said, you have to do that until the vaccine is available. When the vaccine is available, that'll be different. You can prove it one way or the other. So right now, the cloudiest liberty depends on, you lose your liberty if they haven't created something that hasn't been created and might be a detriment. And so therefore, you have to wait until there's a vaccine to be put on the market. And then when you start thinking about Bill Gates and what type of vaccine he wants to have permanent identification and a vaccine plus a lot of other things. And that's the type of thing these power freaks are, will like. And this judge, I'm sure, would just love that. And that's why he connected it. He says, you must obey me until we have a really good way to follow you with the injected types of vaccines, and then we can control all your activity. You wouldn't get on an airplane without the vaccine, and you don't get your freedom to work without your vaccine. It's pretty sad, and that's what the people have to wake up about. And I've seen some pretty strong comments in the newspapers of people saying, I am not going to put up with this any longer. And they're speaking out. We've had it locally, and we see it Texas. I'm sad to find out there's too many stories coming out of Texas. We used to think Texas would be a little bit better on this, but we have authoritarians in Texas too, and we'd like to, neutralize that attitude and make sure that they're not running the show. We need to calm everybody down. But it is good to be with you today, and we deeply appreciate your support and the messages being spread. We're getting more viewers each day, and this to me is a good sign, that more people are watching and more people are referencing us. So I want to thank you very much for being with us, and please come back to the Liberty Report soon and bring somebody with you.